This video was brought to you by Nebula. We're now almost 2 full weeks into the general election campaign, and it's fair to say that the party leaders are in battle mode. We've seen a number of policy announcements, we've seen the rough schedule of debates, 2 of which are happening this week, and we've seen Ed Davey doing various physical activities. When the election was called, the Labour Party had roughly a 21-point lead, with them sitting in the mid-40-something point range, and the Tories sitting somewhere in the low 20s. With the campaign now in full swing though, it's worth asking, has polling changed? And what does this tell us about what's likely to happen in the general election itself? Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Now, it's worth starting this video by properly going through what the polling numbers were before the election, as this will help us understand how the polling has changed since. The main polling companies all usefully released a poll at some point in the week before the election was called. Now, their numbers varied a bit, but ultimately came to the same conclusions, that Labour's lead was holding. The last YouGov poll before the election announcement, which was based on polling conducted on the 21st and 22nd of May, gave the Tories 21%, Labour 46%, the Lib Dems 7%, and Reform UK 12%, giving Labour a huge 25-point lead. Similarly, the last Survation poll, conducted on the same days, gave the Tories 27%, Labour 48%, the Lib Dems 8%, and Reform UK 8%. Now this translates to a slightly narrower but still impressive 21-point lead for the Labour Party. Redfield and Wilson polling from the 19th of May gave very similar numbers to the Survation poll, predicting a 21-point lead for Labour, with them on 45%, the Tories on 23%, the Lib Dems on 10%, and Reform on 12%. Now, the main conclusion from these numbers are obviously how huge the Labour lead is, and how tricky it will be for the Conservatives to overcome this in such a short campaign period. However, it's also worth noting the large Reform UK numbers here. Considering that they were only established as a party 5 years ago, the fact that their polling prior to the election announcement was hovering between 8 and 12% is genuinely impressive. Now, it's unlikely due to the first past the post system that Reform will achieve any seats in the election based on these numbers, but if they are correct, they will certainly cause headaches for Sunak. And that's because it's likely that the vast majority of votes for Reform UK could come from people who usually vote Tory. So, in an attempt to win these people back, Sunak has tried to appeal very specifically to his base to try and stem the tide of Tory defectors. He's done this by promising to bring back national service, introducing a quadruple lock on the state pension, and to define sex as biological sex in law. These are all policies you'd expect the right-wing Tory base, those who might be tempted towards reform, to approve of. So it's clear what the strategy is here. Labour, on the other hand, have been trying simply to maintain their polling lead. It seems that they're really playing things safe here, with no major policy announcements as yet, nor any major campaign fumbles, at least other than the controversy surrounding candidate selection. Presumably assuming that he's on the precipice of power, Starmer has been trying to make clear in interviews that he can be trusted to lead the country for the next 5 years, with him stating on Monday that he's committed to the Trident nuclear weapon system and that he would push the nuclear button if required. Starmer is also trying to reassure voters that Labour, that has historically struggled to persuade voters that it can be trusted on the economy, is the party of businesses, by explaining that as many as 100 business leaders back his party in the upcoming election. The question is, though, as a result of both Sunak and Starmer's respective campaigns, have the polls actually changed? Now, it's worth mentioning that we are only around 2 weeks into the campaign, so we don't have too many polls to go off yet. But as things stand, it appears that the numbers are holding relatively steady. The most recent YouGov poll, which was polling conducted between the 29th and 30th of May, shows that Labour still lead by 25 points, with Labour on 46%, the Tories on 21%, Lib Dems on 8%, and Reform on 15%. The most interesting thing here, though, is the uptick for Reform, who are only 6 points behind the Tories. The story is similar when we look at the most recent opinion poll too, with this poll conducted between the 29th and 31st of May, finding that Labour's lead stands at 20 points, a slight decrease from the other polls, but not a significant one. Opinion put Labour at 45% then, the Tories at 25%, the Lib Dems at 8%, and Reform at 11%. Again, the fact that Reform UK are still in double digits is impressive and will cause even more consternation for Sunak. The most interesting of these most recent polls, though, is the one produced by the poller Find Out Now for the Daily Mail. This is because it's an MRP poll, meaning that not only do we get the headline voting intention figures, but because of its size and methodology, we can see the associated seat share from the poll. After polling more than 10,000 people, Find Out Now found that Labour had a 27-point lead. Now, in terms of seat share, without tactical voting, this would translate to 493 seats for Labour, 72 for the Tories, 39 for the Lib Dems, and 0 for Reform. In effect, giving Labour a landslide majority of 336 seats. If we allow for tactical voting, then both the Labour and Tory seat share drops, with Labour on 476 and the Tories on 66. However, Labour will still command a 302-seat majority. Now, the key takeaway here is that if the election does end up looking anything like this, then we're in the territory of a complete realignment. The Lib Dems would only be a handful of seats away from being the second largest party and becoming the official opposition, news that would spook the Tories and inevitably fuel further factional infighting. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that this will happen. It is, after all, only one poll. However, right now it's the only MRP poll we have to go on, and demonstrates just how perilous things are for the Tories right now. Now, they do have a number of weeks to try and improve this, but it is a massive hurdle to overcome. And whether the polling does tighten is ultimately anyone's guess. That's not the end of the story though, and if you want to continue more, then you should check out Nebula News. Nebula News is our joint venture with Nebula, where the TLDR team curates a selection of videos that matter most in the world right now. No more feeling out of touch or not knowing what to say at events. On Nebula News, we guide you through the news that matters most, using videos from a huge variety of creators, helping you to find stories and better avoid burning out. It's not just curated news content brought to you by us though. Nebula also features loads of exclusive original content. That's things like Real Life Law's brand new series War Room, which every month runs you through a whole load of ongoing conflicts to keep you in the loop. You can also watch every TLDR video on Nebula ad-free and in many instances before they land on YouTube. Now, if you're already subscribed to Nebula, then you can check out the new Nebula News section at nebula.tv/news. And be sure to bookmark it or save that link so you can use it as your TLDR-ified news homepage. If you're not a member already, then you can click the link in the description to sign up now. And if you do, you'll get 40% off an annual plan by using that link. That's less than £2 a month. Plus, Nebula will know that you came from us, which really helps us out.